Picture a king on a throne, long hair flowing past his shoulders, uncut beard, crown on his head. He looks the part. But he owns a single estate. He travels by ox cart. He has no army, no treasury, no real authority. Meanwhile, the man standing beside him, the mayor of the palace, commands every soldier in the kingdom and controls every coin. This is the Merovingian dynasty in its final century, descendants of Clovis, the warrior who conquered all of Gaul, now reduced to figureheads. The writer Einhard, Charlemagne's own biographer, described them as kings who were satisfied to hold the name of king only and pretending to rule. How does a dynasty that once conquered all of Gaul end up like this? The answer isn't about weak individuals, it's about a system designed to fail. To understand how this happened, we need to understand what these kingdoms didn't have. The Roman Empire ran on infrastructure, roads, tax collectors, a literate bureaucracy, meaning a permanent government staffed by professional administrators who keep working regardless of who's in charge, plus stable coinage and a professional army paid in wages. When the Western Empire collapsed, these systems degraded. The Germanic kingdoms that replaced Rome inherited fragments, some literacy, some organizational memory, but not the apparatus itself. No reliable taxes, no professional civil service, no standing army on the state payroll, and that gap changed everything about how kings held power. Without taxes, Merovingian kings relied on three resources to hold power. First, plunder from military campaigns. Second, land grants to reward followers. Third, personal charisma, the ability to compel obedience through force of personality and reputation. Think of these as three pillars holding up the crown. Each one looks solid at first, but every single one is inherently depleting. Use them, and they shrink. Stop using them, and they vanish. Plunder requires constant expansion. When you stop conquering, the treasure stops flowing. King Clovis learned this firsthand. His soldiers rebelled when he refused to campaign against the Saxons, not out of bloodlust, but because war was their paycheck. No campaign, no loot, no loyalty. The Old English poem Beowulf captures this economy perfectly. A dragon sits on a hoard of gold it can never spend. Treasure only has value when it circulates. When a king distributes it to his warriors, land grants are even worse. You give land to a follower, and it's gone forever. Without new conquests to replenish the royal domain, kings literally run out of things to give. And charisma, it dies with the charismatic leader. You cannot inherit it, institutionalize it, or store it in a vault. So the resources ran out. But here's the strange part. The Merovingians didn't disappear. They couldn't be removed. To understand why, we need to meet the man who actually ran the kingdom, the mayor of the palace, or mayordomus, a combination of prime minister and the defense minister. Originally a household manager, the mayor of the palace accumulated the military and administrative power over generations. And here's the critical mechanism. Because their authority came from land and soldiers, not a royal paycheck, they couldn't simply be fired. Their offices became hereditary, transforming appointed positions into family property. The king nominally appointed the mayor, but the mayor controlled the army, distributed the land, and managed the administration. Power flowed downward from the mayor to local lords through land grants, and loyalty flowed back up through military service. The king sat at the top of this structure in theory. In practice, he sat outside it entirely. By 650, the mayors of the palace held every level of real power. The Merovingian king retained exactly one thing: legitimacy. Around 661, a mayor of the palace named Grimoald, an ancestor of Charlemagne, decided to skip the pretense. He deposed the Merovingian king and placed his own son on the throne. He was executed, not because he lacked power, he had plenty, but because the Merovingian bloodline carried a sacred aura that no amount of military force could replicate. The long hair, the ceremonial customs, the mystique of descent from Clovis. The Frankish nobility wouldn't follow a usurper, even a powerful one, right? This is the central paradox. The kings had no power, but their legitimacy was unassailable. No one obeyed them, but no one could replace them either. A political limbo that lasted nearly a century. Compare this with two contemporary states. The Byzantine Empire maintained a functioning tax system, land taxes, customs duties, professional civil service, and state-paid soldiers organized into regional units called seams. The Abbasid Caliphate ran a sophisticated administrative system called the Diwan, collected reliable taxes, and paid its armies from the central treasury. In both cases, a weak emperor or caliph didn't collapse the state because people obeyed the institution, not the individual. The Merovingians had none of this, no taxes, no bureaucracy, no state-funded military. When the king was weak, the entire system was weak. Now, some historians call this process feudalism, decentralization, hereditary offices, weakened royal power, but no one at the time used that word. It better describes the period after 1000. What we're really seeing is the inheritance of offices and the collapse of central authority. The Merovingian decline is a case study in what makes states durable. A successful state survives mediocre rulers because people obey the institution, not the individual. The Merovingians never built that kind of state. They ran a personal power system in a post-imperial landscape, and when the personal resources ran out, so did their authority. The Carolingians, Charlemagne's family, eventually solved the legitimacy problem, but it took nearly a century of being the real rulers before they could claim the title. Grimoald failed in 1661. Pippin III, Charlemagne's father, finally deposed the last Merovingian king in 751 with the Pope's blessing, and Charlemagne's coronation as emperor in Rome in 800 was the culmination of that long, patient transfer of power. Power that depends on a person always dies with that person. Power that depends on a system can outlast centuries. The Merovingians learned this the hard way. They started with a conqueror's charisma, a treasury full of plunder, and a kingdom's worth of land to distribute. Within a few generations, all three were spent. What remained was a sacred bloodline with no authority and a household official with no legitimacy, locked together in a political stalemate that shaped the DNA of medieval Europe. And the lesson extends far beyond the early Middle Ages. Every state faces the same question: does your power rest on a person or on an institution?